I'm sure there are some of us in this room who at some point went to the doctor and got a diagnosis that was bad news, not news that you were expecting to hear. And for some of us, maybe some of the most uncomfortable or upsetting moments of our lives is when we went to the doctor, or maybe a loved one went to the doctor and got bad news, a diagnosis of something that was wrong with them. Those moments, as uncomfortable as they might be, say I have several loved ones who have gone to the doctor and they've come back with the diagnosis, the information that they've been diagnosed with cancer. It's a horrible diagnosis to receive, but it's also a necessary diagnosis, because in order to deal with the problem that these loved ones have, they have to be able to realize what problem they have, get that diagnosis so that they can know what to do in order to deal with that problem, what kind of treatment they have to undergo, and how to deal with this really bad problem. You know, one of the lies that I think that we have to be aware of about the Bible is that it's a book that's always just supposed to make us feel good. That it's always, every time we open it, we find some fluffy verse that we can put on our refrigerator or the background of our phones and just feel uplifted and soft and puffy every time we read the Bible. There are certainly passages that are encouraging, and there's something incredibly hopeful and inspiring about the message of the gospel, which is the very heart of this book that we read and study together. But because the Bible is the Word of God, a holy God, a sovereign and eternal God who is so unlike us and who loves us enough to tell us what's wrong with us and tell us why we so desperately need Jesus, there's going to be times where we come to the Bible and it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable when we read it. The Bible often, like a good doctor, diagnoses something that is desperately wrong with us. And as uncomfortable it is to receive that news, it's necessary. Because the hope of the gospel and who Jesus is and what he's done for us always provides a path forward and a solution to deal with all of the problems that result because of our sin. So in a very real and genuine way, I hope that every single one of you, to some degree tonight, feels very uncomfortable and rubbed the wrong way by this passage as we study it and we read it tonight. And don't take that as me being unkind, because what this passage does, I think to some degree, in varying degrees, but for every single one of us, this passage is going to point out and reveal a problem that each and every single one of us has. And it's a problem that I think each and every single one of us deals with and fails in every single day of our lives. And I hope it makes you uncomfortable to hear this. And if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, or if you don't think this applies to you, I want to encourage you to listen closely and read over what we're studying tonight, because I am certain that every word of this applies to your life. So James, as he is in this book calling us to an undivided life where our belief is lined up with our behavior. And throughout, in order to call us to that undivided life, James is revealing and identifying all of the ways that our life is so often divided. He's saying, you guys can't just be hearers of the Word of God. You have to be doers of it too. You can't just say you have faith. You have to have works and a life that reflects what you say about Jesus. It's taking this belief and behavior and drawing them together and showing how the gospel pools our divided lives together to become undivided. And what he is doing here in this passage, as he addresses the topic of our words, he's telling us the bad news about one of the, if not the most common or frequent way that our lives prove to be divided. James is pointing to our tongues and the way that we speak and the words that come out of our mouth and saying, our words are the most obvious way that the divided nature of our hearts is visible and apparent. And as we consider this for ourselves, I hope that you understand that this is true of you, what he's writing to these readers. He's presenting us with bad news, and it's a good thing that this makes us uncomfortable, because it's only when we understand the bad news that we can understand what is so important about the good news of the gospel. Tonight, I think this passage tells us three things about our words. The words that we speak, and not just the words that we speak. This is written in the first century, but now I think that any way that we communicate, and especially now in this internet age that we live in with social media, we live in a time where perhaps this is more relevant than ever. Because he's going to talk about how there is no way that we more often show the divided nature of our hearts than when we just let words spill out of our mouths. And right now we live in a world where you guys have more avenues, me included, have more avenues of communications and more opportunities to fail in this than at any time in human history. There's three things about our words that I want you to know. The first is this, and we'll see it in verses 1 through 5, and it's that our words are surprisingly powerful. Our words are surprisingly powerful. It is in our human nature that when we encounter something that is uniquely powerful, it's in our nature to approach it with caution. So if any of you have ever held a gun or used a power tool or had to drive with a really fast car, there's a natural tendency that we have when there's a lot of power with what we're dealing with to have a tendency to take caution. However, having been a youth pastor for a long enough time here, I've encountered my job is to spend time with high schoolers, and when you're in high school, many of you learn how to drive a car for the first time. How many of you have recently gotten your license this year? It shows in the way that you drive out in the parking lot. See, the natural caution that you should have when you get into a powerful motor vehicle, I don't necessarily see that with every single one of you when I see you drive out of this parking lot. And really, there's nothing more scary than somebody who is careless or reckless with something that's incredibly powerful, right? And a motor vehicle is a powerful machine. And there's a reason why you have to go through a whole series of classes and tests in order to prepare you and teach you and equip you to be able to equip and maneuver and navigate a very powerful machine out on the road. And a word for you tonight is that not many of you should become drivers, my dear brothers and sisters. My concern with some of you is that you are very careless with something that is very powerful. This concern that I have for you when it comes to driving is very similar to the concern that James has for his readers. He says, you've been dealing with something that is really powerful, yet it doesn't seem that you're aware of how powerful this thing actually is. And the thing that he's talking about is the tongue. He's talking about the way that these Christians and how people in general tend to speak. James' concern is that the responsibility that these people have in the way that they speak is not one that they're taking with the proper the care and concern for the power of their words. And that's why he says, my brothers, not many of you should become teachers. Why does he say that? Why does he kick off this section with that? Because teachers, it's a great way to introduce this, teachers do what? Their primary role, my job here tonight is primarily to use words. I'm probably going to do more talking here than anybody else tonight, is to use my words to communicate a message to you. And because words are powerful, I'm given a responsibility, a significant responsibility here to use something that's very powerful, to use the powerful means by which God has chosen to advance his kingdom through the sharing of the gospel, through the word of Christ. He's given teachers and preachers, and each of you as disciples to some degree, the great privilege of sharing the good news of Jesus through words. And teachers have a special and unique responsibility and a weighty responsibility because they use a lot of words. And words are powerful. But they're surprisingly powerful. What this passage should reveal to us is that we often do approach our words carelessly. I'm sure this isn't coming to a surprise to any of you. I'm sure you can think of, like, just in the past day or week, like, do we have anything careless that we said that we regret? A text that we sent that we shouldn't have sent? A snap that we sent out that we shouldn't have sent? Like, all of us, in all of the ways that we communicate, it's very obvious if we're honest with ourselves that we fail very often in this. There are studies that, they have varying numbers on this, but there are studies that say on average people speak 15,000 to 20,000 words a day. You ever written a paper and the requirement's like 500 words and it feels like the longest thing you've ever written? Imagine writing a 20,000 word paper every day. That's how much you talk. How many of us, in all those words that we speak, if we think about how many words that actually is, how often do we let those words fly out of our mouths without thinking twice about what we're saying, without filtering at all what message we're communicating, without considering the consequences of the words that we utter and what they might lead to in our relationships, at our job, in our school, whatever it might be. We speak a lot, and our words are powerful. But why is that? If words are so powerful, and we're all sitting here, I hope you can agree to some degree that words are really powerful, then why is it that we treat them so carelessly? Why is it that we let words just tumble out of our mouths and often, and so often, fail in what we say? I think the way that James talks about this here is helpful because one of the primary reasons he addresses is because our tongues are so relatively small. They sneak up on us, and they're not only powerful, but they're surprisingly powerful. And he uses two really simple pictures to explain what this means, and it's really helpful. I tried to find the dopest picture of a horse I could find on Google. This horse is a unit. Look at those shoulder muscles on that horse. Can you imagine this horse running at you and trying to stop it? You couldn't stop it. It would trample you. You'd be done for. Horses are one of the top powerful animals there are. That's why James uses it as an example. Your car doesn't have squirrel power in the engine or fish power. It's horsepower because horses are powerful. Yet this unit, Black Beauty, Brown Beauty here, is so strong, and you could do nothing to stop him or her, but there's this thing called a bit that James refers to here. It's like a couple inches long. It's a little piece of metal that if you put it in a horse's mouth and you have reins, that little piece of metal put in the horse's mouth can take this monstrous horse being, and steer this horse and make it go wherever and you ever seen a jockey, like one of these horse riding professionals? They're like the smallest people you've ever seen. And using a bit and reins, they can steer a horse wherever they want it to go. It's this little thing that has incredible influence and power over this powerful animal. And then there's another example that James uses. He uses the example of a ship. In one of the books I was reading this week, it talks about this ship in particular that's on the screen. One of the biggest ships in the world is the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Eisenhower. It weighs over 91,000 tons, is nearly 1,100 feet in length, and has a nuclear-powered 280,000 horsepower engine, a complement of 6,100 men and women, and carries nearly 100 planes. It is vast, it is a floating city. And yet, all of the weight on this ship, personnel, all the hardware, it's steered by a rudder that is 0.1% of this ship's size. A tiny little rudder that takes this massive ship and steers it wherever the pilot wants it to go. Small, seemingly inconsequential, but so very influential and powerful. It's a small picture, two great pictures of the power of our words. We utter 20,000 words a day because we don't think about how powerful our words actually are. We think about them carelessly, but they have this immense power that even though they're small. Verse 5, the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. See, this book of James is just full of these gut punches. When we were talking about the tone of the passage, and I was talking to Robbie, and Robbie's like, I think the tone of this passage is heavy metal, just chugging electric guitar while this is going, because it's coming at you with these like rapid fire, hard hitting, like no punches pulled, like just heavy metal, pointing at the very worst things, the most obvious things of what is wrong with us deep down in our hearts and the way that it bubbles up into the way that we talk. And I think this passage might be one of the biggest gut checks in the entire book. Every day, each and every single one of us arguably commits this sin every single day. And none of us, James talks about how incredibly difficult it is for us to even manage just one day, one moment of trying to bridle our tongues. He says that if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body, back in verse 2. He says of all the things for us to try to control, the tongues might be the very most difficult because of how carelessly we treat it and how powerful it actually is. In every conversation we enter throughout the day, it's like we approach each person that we talk to with a loaded gun, this incredible potential for power that exists in what we say to people. But we approach these people carelessly so often and thoughtlessly. Just take a moment, just in the quietness of your heart, think through the conversations that you've had today, the things that you've posted on social media, and just think through what is the potential harm or consequences to something that I said flippantly, to something that I didn't think through before I posted it. I think we start to see the potential consequences. We start to understand how powerful our words actually are. And even when we do approach conversations with care and thought, we find that controlling what we say, our tongues are so powerful that even when we do try to be careful and thoughtful, we still fail in what we say. And that's what James is going to go on here to say, is that so verse 2, if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man. And it goes on to say there are few things more difficult than taming this power of the tongue. And that leads us to point number 2, is that our words are untamably evil. So they're surprisingly powerful. Second, they're untamably evil. If you're not uncomfortable yet, keep listening. You will get uncomfortable. One of the greatest tragedies that our world experienced just this year, and all the crazy stuff that happened in 2020, were these California wildfires that just raged. If you saw them on the news, just absolutely incredible and breathtaking. You look at this video of San Francisco, and the entire city is just this orange color with just in the smog and the fire just in the background, and it looks like something from a science fiction movie. These fires rage through the state of California. And you've got people who live miles away from the fires who have to pack up their stuff and they have to leave because there's nothing that they can do to stop this raging fire that's going to move towards their house and eventually burn up all their stuff in the place where they live. This unstoppable force of these forest fires, what do they start with? It starts with something as small as somebody flicking a cigarette butt out of a window, a campfire, a little campfire that wasn't fully extinguished. Something so massive and powerful that starts with just a spark. And it's the picture that James uses here to show when we take these powerful words, this incredible potential for power that we have in what we say, and we think carelessly about it, we don't understand how powerful they are. He says, look to what this can lead to. It's not only powerful, but it's powerful and destructive. Powerful towards a destructive end. Think about, just the simple way that you can see this for yourselves, and think about a celebrity who tweets something stupid and how quickly those tweets go viral. And you see people who thoughtlessly tweet something about their boss, and the next day they're fired. Or the next day it's viral and they're famous and they're on the news. I think Twitter is a wonderful example of the way that our words, seemingly so small, one sentence, a sentence fragment, can just pick up momentum and turn into something that we never intended it to be. And while you may not go viral on Twitter, think about in your schools. The little comment, something you said about somebody behind their back that got away from you, and somebody heard it that wasn't supposed to, and then somebody else told them about it. And then before you know it, the entire school hears this thing that you thought you told one person that you never should have said in the first place. Any of us who are honest with ourselves can see how quickly our words are just a little spark that starts fires that so often we can do nothing to keep them under control. And the reason why we're able to quickly recall these instances of seemingly harmless words is because of what James says in verse 6. It says, the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. It's a very sobering words. This is James at his very most heavy metal. Just going, this is what your words are like. This is what your words can do. And he's saying, not only are your words powerful and capable of doing damage, but he says your words are powerful and prone to doing damage. More often than not, our words do destroy. They do hurt people. They do set these fires that we can't do anything to control. They're actually inclined towards that. It's the most likely outcome of the carelessness of our words. There's not just a chance that we sin when we open our mouths. There's a likelihood that we sin because of how powerful our words are. It's a sobering thought. And if this isn't bad enough that our tongues are inclined towards evil, James tells us that this evil is uncontrollable and untamable. Verse 7, every kind of beast and bird, every reptile can be tamed as has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil, full of deadly poison. It's this picture, if you think about like the most powerful animal at the zoo. There's a huge Mufasa lion at the Cleveland Zoo. You go, somehow this massive creature, there's like a zookeeper or trainer that has managed over a long course of time been able to train this wild animal and domesticate it and tame it. But the great irony of that picture is that zookeeper, that trainer, that is able to train this lion, at the same time cannot control and tame what he says with his very own mouth. It's a powerful picture. Say our tongues are small, but they are powerful, untamable, uncontrollable, and they're actually a restless evil, and they're poisonous. And if any of you has ever had a moment where somebody just says some little comment, you've had those moments where it just eats away at you, and you see the way that words can either build people up, but so often they tear people apart. They eat at your heart. They plant this little seed of bitterness or anger or jealousy or covetousness in your heart. We've experienced exactly what James is talking about here. It's because our tongues are an uncontrollable fire, a restless evil, and a deadly poison that all of this damage can be done by simply what we say. And as James is working through his diagnosis of this problem, each point here, so that's point number 2. So there's the power of our tongues, a surprising power, and then it gets worse because we find out that that power is actually prone to do damage. And then his final point, which is even worse than that, is that those damaging words, that restless evil, reveals not just something that's just in our words, but it reveals something really bad that's going on in each and every one of our hearts. Our words reveal divided hearts, and that's our point for our third point for verses 9 through 12. Verse 9, with our tongues we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. And from the same mouth come blessing and cursing. I want to be really honest with you guys. Back when I was in high school, I grew up here. I came to this youth group. I went to SI. I did this whole thing. And I would guess that like my small group leaders would have looked at me and they're like, goofy kid, seems to kind of know what's going on here. Just like a normal Christian kid who goes to church. And then I would go to school, and I had an entirely different group of friends. And in this group of friends, like, we prided ourselves on, like, I was really good at swearing back when I was in high school. I prided myself on what I thought were hilarious, dirty jokes. And I basically would do anything that I could do to get a cheap laugh from my friends. And I remember one particular instance where I was with a group of friends, and we were talking about somebody who wasn't there, that was kind of like attached to our friend group. And I had used some choice words, some expletives, to basically like make this joke to roast this dude who wasn't there. And it got just like a huge laugh from like everybody in the room. And I got, the reward of saying something funny and go like, oh, that was hilarious. But there was this one girl who was there at this party hanging out. And she turns to me and she goes, aren't you supposed to be a Christian? And it was just this moment where like, and people are still laughing, but like those words stuck with me. And like it cut to my heart for the rest of that night. And it like, even now, that was like 12, 13 years ago. And to this day, as I'm working through this passion, I'm thinking through that moment. I go, this girl wasn't even a Christian. She knew these words that I was speaking, the way that I was talking about somebody else, the unkind words that I was saying, that it didn't square up with what I said about who I was. And the fact that I went to church and that I was Danny, the Christian kid. And she even saw, like, those things don't match up. Your words contradict who you say you are. And I knew that it was true. And that's why it killed me. And that's why it ate away at me. And I say that I want to be honest about that with you guys so that you can return the favor and be honest with yourselves tonight. When I think about the person that I am when I'm here and the way that I talk, and then I think about the person I am at school around a different group of friends, the people who don't know the church version of you, is there a difference between the way that you talk and treat people and use your words in that setting and in this setting? And if there is, do you think there's a problem with that? And beyond that question, why do you think that is? Why is it that you're one person while you're here, one person while you're here, and one person while you're at school? And I want you to really think about these verses of what James is saying here and seeing how much of a problem it is to be that kind of a double-minded, divided person. And to see how those words that you speak point to something really troubling, something urgent that you have to deal with deep down in your heart. And by God's grace, those little moments of that girl saying that passing comment that she probably never thought about again, God used those things to make me uncomfortable, to make me miserable, to convict me of this way that I fail in this area of my life. That what I said I believed didn't match up with what I behaved. I was a divided person. And God used those things and used the weight of that to push me towards Jesus, who over time, not perfectly, but progressively, took my belief and my behavior and drew those things together. And I can say now that even though I'm not perfect in the way that I talk, I can say from back then to now, God has drawn the way that I talk and made it more and more to reflect the character of Jesus. But it's only when I realized that my words represented the dividedness of my heart that I was ever able to move in that direction and ask Jesus for help. And that's what I want you guys to come to tonight. And even if you're not as bad as what I said, and even if you're worse than what I said, if wherever you find yourself, all of us to some degree have a divided heart. That we've got these passions that are at war within us, that we live with this battle between, if you're a Christian, this battle between following after the Spirit of God and doing what our flesh wants us to do. We live in this divided division of our hearts. And we have to be able to identify that. Say that our words aren't these meaningless things that we float out into the air, but they are this really significant reflection and expression of the state of our hearts. And you see, our words are evil and untamable because our hearts are evil and untamable. And our words are symptoms of something that is desperately wrong with something deep down inside of us. I hope that makes you feel uncomfortable. I hope you're thinking about the way that you talk. And I hope if you're asking the question, does it matter that I'm one person while I'm here and one person while I'm at school or with whoever or at work? What does that say? Why is that so? Every single one of us has to ask that question. If you have an evil heart, your words will eventually and inevitably reveal the problem. Just like it did for me when that girl called me out. James approaches this logically and simply. He says in these verses, can a stream pour forth both fresh and salt water? Can a tree produce two different kinds of fruit? He's pointing to the fact that if you've got bad words, it means you have a bad heart. Jesus himself says in Luke 6, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, his mouth speaks. Out of our mouths overflow what is ultimately and truly down at the bottom of our hearts. If you started to feel shooting pain in your left arm and tightness in your chest and shortness of breath and severe chest pain and all that stuff, you would be crazy if you ignored those symptoms and were like, all right, I'm just going to go pop some Tylenol PM and go to bed. That would be crazy because those symptoms reveal a really urgent problem of what's going on with your physical heart. And essentially, James here is saying your divided speech is revealing a really urgent and significant spiritual problem of the dividedness of your heart. And I do not want you guys to leave here tonight thinking that I can have an unbridled, untamed tongue and words that say anything and everything and think that that doesn't matter, that that doesn't point to a problem that you have in your heart, because it 100% absolutely does. So our words are powerful, surprisingly powerful. They're an untamable evil, and they're evidence of a divided heart. James has uncomfortably and honestly confronted us with a brutal diagnosis that addresses each of us in varying degrees, but applies to each and every single one of us, one way or another. I want to tell you how I don't want you to walk away from tonight. I don't want you to walk away and go, all right, I'm not going to swear anymore. I'm going to delete that fake Instagram account that only like my close friends follow. I am going to basically just do everything I can to try my best to not say bad words or do bad or gossip behind people's back or whatever. That may seem like just the real quick solution to just going, okay, bad words, stop saying bad words, stop saying bad things, stop saying mean things, end of story. Because if you're listening to what James is saying here, you don't ultimately have a word problem. You have a heart problem that has resulted in a word problem. I don't have a word problem. I have a heart problem that has resulted and expressed and manifested itself in a word problem. That temporary fix of just trying our best to not say bad words is not going to fix the real issue. But thankfully, like a good doctor, James does not just provide a diagnosis, but he points us to a solution. And when we jump into these next verses, next time we study in January, I think he gets into some of the solution here. But I also think there's part of the solution earlier on in the letter. Because our divided words, more than anything, our divided words that point to a divided heart, point us to the fact that we desperately need Jesus. You have a sick heart that you cannot do anything to fix or heal on your own. And the message of the gospel is that you have a heart that is desperately sick and you need a new heart more than anything else. And that's the good news of the gospel, is that in what Jesus has done for us, he offers us not just to clean up our lives and to wipe the smudges off and to make us look better, but he said make us look better, but he says, I'm going to give you an entirely new life. I'm going to give you a new heart. I'm going to give you new desires. I'm going to give you this new person. I'm going to give you my spirit to dwell in you, to start to produce things in your heart that were never there before. And as the Spirit of God dwells in us, and as it talks about in Colossians, the word of Christ dwells in us richly, which makes me think back to earlier on, this is what I was saying before, earlier on in chapter 1, verse 18, it says that God has brought us forth to new life by his word of truth. And then verse 21, he's implanted the perfect word of the gospel in our hearts, which is able to save us. So, in chapter 1, we talked about what is our biggest, we're often fooled into thinking our biggest problems exist outside of us, and the solution to our big problems must exist inside of us, right? I'll figure things out. But the gospel tells us it's entirely the other way around. Your biggest problem is what's going on at the very bottom of your heart. And the only solution is what God outside of you has done in Jesus and done in your heart, and implanting that word of truth and giving you his Spirit and promising over time to make you more and more like Jesus. Gives you a new heart that produces words that look like the words of Jesus. A life that looks more like the life of Jesus. Not because you did anything, but because God's doing it in you. And you made yourself available to him and you depend on him in all of these things. To fix our divided speech, we need a heart that looks like the undivided heart of Jesus. And the way that we get that is simply asking God for it, making ourselves available to him. Just getting on our knees and praying and asking God, make me more like Jesus. Like that prayer that David says, just cleanse my heart, blot out my iniquities, change me. And that is a work that we make ourselves available to God, and he does that work in us and through us. The promise that we have in the gospel is that when we receive a new heart, the rest of our lives, slowly but surely, our hearts, our lives, and our words will reflect more and more the heart, life, and words of Jesus. Have you trusted in Jesus? You guys are sick of me asking you this, but it's really the only question that matters. Have you trusted in Jesus? Do you have a heart like Jesus because he's given you a new heart, because he's given you new birth? Because if you don't, you can try your very best to change the way that you talk and to try and fix this problem. But it's going to be like going out in your yard and trying to pluck the tops of the dandelions out of your yard. The next day, because you didn't deal with the root problem, they're just going to pop up again. Jesus Christ deals with the very heart of our greatest problem and gives us a brand new heart that is capable of being tamed and produces words that don't destroy, but they build up. They speak truth. And they do the very opposite of everything that James has diagnosed and described here. Trust in Jesus will give you a new heart, which will produce words that sound and look like Jesus.